All right, folks. So that is all of our counselors. That's our school counseling department. All of our school counselors will be working with our seniors as they work their way through the application process. And one of the things we'll talk about tonight is a little bit of the breakdown of kind of who does what. Just to get things started, I want to give thank you and your students for starting to reach out to us with many questions throughout the latter part of the summer and in this first week of the school year. I know I'm definitely backed up with emails and getting back to students and starting appointments. We are working through the rest of this week to get through the add drop period of scheduling. And then we'll be really shifting gears into the seniors and kind of the college process next week when our counselors will begin having kind of medium-sized groups with the seniors to walk them through much of the same information that we're going to cover tonight. Throughout the presentation tonight, we do have the Q&A function on, and our school counselors, I'll be presenting, the school counselors will be pitching in and answering a lot of those questions. We do ask that, if you're going to ask a question, that's great, fantastic, but I encourage you to try to ask things relevant to what we're talking about at the time, because odds are we're probably going to get there with the content of the presentation. Also, I will warn you, if things are a little bit squirrely technologically tonight, we do have new devices, and so there's a little bit of a learning curve with us getting used to where things are on our new devices. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Some of the things we're going to cover, I'm going to do a little super quick review, and then get into the components of the application and our specific HHS process. Before I do get started, you've received something from me over the weekend about our college representative visits. That's one of the things we're working on right now, is getting things set up. We have more than 120 college and military visitors who are coming to school here to HSS this fall during the school day. Those start up next Monday as well. Students can sign up to attend visits, up to 8 for seniors. They are a wonderful opportunity to hear about schools. That being said, I'll be the first one to tell you that they are not a must in order to get admitted. It's okay. Students are still going to get admitted to schools if they can't attend because they've got a test, they've got something else going on. There's more schools than they can, reasonably visit during the school day. That is totally fine. Also, I know I've already been hearing, hey, the Rutgers visits, full. You know what? I'll be the first one as a Rutgers alum. I love Rutgers. It's fantastic. If I only had 8 visits, it wouldn't be on my priority list to attend that visit here in school. And that is because Rutgers is right around the corner from us. You can visit them at any time. They do not care about demonstrated interest at all. They are not recording the fact that you're here and attaching it to your application or anything. It is a large visit, and I just honestly think there are better visits to go to if I need to, kind of be selective about which of the visits I'm going to go to. So I would say that about some of the very large visits, Penn State, some of the other ones, there's other ways to hear about some of those schools. So if you don't get into those visits, it's really and truly okay. Okay, just to review a couple of things, we've got our 2-year college application process and our 4-year process. This presentation this evening is really going to be focused on the 4-year process. Some of those students may also be applying to 2-year schools like RVCC. That 2-year school application process does occur later. We really kind of work on that in February. We do have an application workshop right here in school to help students through that process. They do not look for transcripts, no letters of recommendation, super easy process. The one thing that is has a little bit more oomph to it, I guess, is the RVCC Honors College. Most of the students who apply to the Honors College at RVCC are also applying to 4-year colleges. So they tend to have a lot of the things that they need for that application, like letters of recommendation, kind of by default because they got them for their 4-year applications. In terms of those 4-year schools, that process is kicking off basically now. Some students may have already submitted an application or 2 or 3, but our goal here is to get those in for those schools by the deadlines. Those deadlines really range from October to January. For those parents that are kind of in my age range, we lived in a land where students were applying to schools in January and February, and that has changed a ton, even in the last 10 years. Here at Hillsborough, I would say the majority of students submit at least one application by the November 1st deadline. That's probably the most popular deadline around here. They have other applications that kind of continue beyond that into regular decision deadlines in early January. We do really try to get everybody to get almost everything out the door before the winter holidays, before winter break, and not really be waiting through those January months. They need to kind of move on at that point. As they're trying to decide what they're doing, they're going to see a bunch of different deadlines. So what we're going to see in these early months are early decision and early action. Early decision is the binding one. Students can apply to one school under the early decision one round. And if they're applying to that school, they can't apply to any other school's early decision. They can apply to, for the most part, pretty much else wherever else they want through regular or early action, etc. That early decision school, if they get into that school, they get that financial aid package right around that same time. That's usually kind of a mid-December kind of time frame. At that point, they would withdraw their applications from all of their other schools, many of which they may not have heard from yet. So a lot of students will hold off on submitting other apps until they kind of find out what's going on with that early decision application. But it really depends on the student and the best plan for them. What I would encourage all early decision students to do, or potential early decision students to do, is to go onto that college's website and do a net price calculator, which will give you some ballpark view of what type of financial aid you can expect or not expect, as the case may be, from that particular school. And once you run that net price calculator, I really encourage you to screenshot or otherwise save those results. Because once you get that financial aid package, at least it gives you kind of a point of conversation with schools if the financial aid package you've gotten is not what you would expect it to be. So that's, definitely my best recommendation there. What we don't want, while yes, you can get out of early decision agreements when a financial aid package doesn't work. Students have lost a lot of time by then. It's a lot of angst for both student and family, as probably their dream school is the place that they got into. And now they're finding out that they may not be able to go. It's definitely an upsetting process. So we really, don't want folks to rely on that piece. Also, if you kind of work things out with the school, of, what, this financial aid package is not enough, it costs too much, we can't come, that early decision and admission offer is totally off the table for that family at that point. So if you can't go because of money, then you can't go, period. They won't be able to say, hold on and decide in May with their other schools or in April that they're still going to go to the school. It's done at that point. So we don't want students to do that. What many of our students will do, a much larger percentage of our students are applying early action. There is no binding obligation to go to the school. They get in early, they can choose to go, they can choose not to go. There are a very couple of schools, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, probably Notre Dame, Georgetown, that have little restrictive policies, Harvard. They are restrictive or single choice early action. And the issues with those schools is that they care about where else you are applying early. So if any of those schools are on your list, make sure you're looking at those guidelines. If you can't interpret them, it's fine. Just come and ask me or shoot me an email and I'll help you figure out, do the schools on your list make sense? We also do some checks on our side. I do checks as we get close to the deadlines to make sure that that you can't do what you're trying to do. You're trying to apply to Princeton and Yale early. You can't do that. You're going to need to pick. I'll let you know if you're doing something that you shouldn't. And then regular enrolling. We hear from those schools on an ongoing basis. Some school students may have applied to schools early that are rolling schools, like University of Pittsburgh, some of the big schools down south. They start sending out decisions real early. So we may already have some students in our senior class who've been admitted to four-year schools. All right, now let's get into kind of the components of the application. Then we'll talk about how they fit together, in what order you want to do things. So we've got an application form. So if we want to apply to a school, we got to fill out a form. Most students will fill out the common application at this point. That is accepted by more than 1,000 schools. There is also a SCORE application that is part of the SCORE website that we use here as kind of an application management system. There are state application systems. So like the University of California system, Applied Texas, the SUNYs, they all have separate applications. Some of them also take the Common App. So University of Texas, you can apply through Applied Texas, or you can apply using the Common App. Then there's also school-specific apps. So some schools only take their own app. Is that a lot at this point? Not a ton. A lot of them also take one of these group apps, but it can help some students out. Because the common application, students can only apply to 20 schools. And while for me, I think for the vast majority of students, 20 is more than you really need. There are some students who are applying to more than that. So they really need to do some work in organizing and making sure that they've looked at which schools take which applications. And so for those students, I said, do the Rutgers specific app, get that off your Common App, do the Rutgers app on their website, and the same thing for some other schools. Our goal is for students to submit as few application forms as possible. If there's no reason for you to be completing each of these 4 bullet point applications, you don't want to. There's no reason that you need to be typing in the name of your high school, your home address, etc., that many different times. You want to do as little work as possible in this area. Because believe me, there's plenty of other places to do work. Transcripts. So schools are going to need some type of academic record for the student. There are many schools that require an official transcript. That's something that we'll send out. We'll talk about it a little bit later. There are lots of other schools now, though, that don't actually take a high school transcript at all, which seems really wild if you don't know anything about kind of this college admission piece in 2024. They require that students either upload an unofficial copy of their transcript, which you can get at any time out of Genesis, or they require that students self-report their grades and courses, which again seems kind of crazy. So how do we know that this kid isn't lying and saying like, of course I have all A's in every subject that's an AP? And I only took APs in gym over 4 years, right? So how do we know someone's not lying? Well, we don't, right? I mean, they might seem a little too good to be true, but we don't know that they're not lying. But when do they get caught? They get caught when they get admitted, try to go to that school, and then we send an official transcript and it doesn't match up. At that point, the offer admission is rescinded. It's July. Bad things happen. So there's lots of different schools that take this self-reported academic record. It is not hard. It is tedious. It does take a little while, about 45 minutes or so to complete. We do work with them in schools. In school here, I have so many guides that take students through exactly what it is that they need to do. So when we talk about self-reporting, one of the big ways to do that is through the standalone SRAR or SSAR. Here's a list of the schools, including you'll see Rutgers, UDEL, Pitt, Penn State. Some of our most popular schools are on this list. The good news is that once a student does it once, they need to do very little to apply to additional schools on this list in terms of the self-reporting of grades. They usually just need to log in, might have to complete 1 or 2 additional fields, clickety-click all the way through and submit. So not hard once you've done it once. Then there's other schools that use different systems for the self-reporting. So there's a system right within the Common App itself called Common App Courses and Grades that students might need to do for these schools that are on the left. This is just kind of the most popular ones, but there's others. So what you'll see is for Purdue, they require that you do it through the Common App. Rutgers, Penn State, and UDEL require you do it in the standalone system. Temple requires that you use their school-specific system. If the student's also applying to University of Illinois, they'll have to do it through their system. Yes, this is very tedious. No, I don't think it's fair. I wish that students didn't have to spend time doing all of that, but that is the process and where we're at today. So students need to pay a lot of attention to make sure they're doing the right things for the right schools. I do have access for some schools to see students' application process, and I try to help them save themselves. So if we're getting close to that University of Delaware deadline, I'm looking in the system I have, and I'm emailing students to tell them, hey, your self-reported academic record's not done. You need to be doing this. And I see someone just asked, when did this change? Rutgers has been doing the SRAR for at least 10 years. A lot of these other schools have as well, but I would say that the number of schools that are taking this self-reporting is increasing every year. But we do try really hard. I spend a lot of time throughout the fall and early, kind of the winter timeline, trying to help students complete their applications that they may not realize are incomplete. This gives you a quick idea of what type of information is getting filled in on those self-reported records. So you see, it's not hard. I'm literally copying my transcript information and I'm putting it into this other website. And I have a lot of resources that I'm going to talk about that'll show them kind of how to do that. Shifting gears, we've got standardized testing. We mostly live in a test optional world right now. There is a greater amount of schools this year that are requiring scores than did last year. So now we've got some Ivies back on the score train, a couple of other places that have gotten back on the scores required train, but most places are right there in the middle, the test optionals. You decide if you want to submit them or not submit them. I generally recommend to students that they look at the mid 50% for the school and see how their scores compare to there. But there are some other details that might come into play for other individual students. Maybe they have a really high SAT math score. They don't know if they want to submit it or not. Maybe their GPA is also below average and their SAT is kind of more in the range. So for some of those students, I'll say to submit it. I would say that the vast majority of our students submit to at least some of their schools as test optional. So students can choose school by school what it is that they want to do. So if they have 1,200 and they're applying to Rider University or Seton Hall, that's going to be above average there. And I'd encourage them, send those scores. It's probably going to help you get some money in scholarship. For Rutgers, that's going to be below average, and a 1,200 will probably keep them out. So I encourage them, do not send your scores to Rutgers so they can pick school by school what it is that they want to do. There are a few schools test blind. The biggies to know, oops, I forgot to take Caltech off there. They did switch from test blind to test required in 1 year. But the big one is the UC system, the University of California system. That whole system does not look at test scores. Another piece that is required by some schools but not others are these letters of recommendation. So some schools are going to require a counselor letter, teacher letters, perhaps an outside letter. But there are lots of other schools out there, especially large state schools. Some of them do not accept any of these things from us. So please don't ask us to send your letters of recommendation to Rutgers because they do not accept them. They don't accept them at Penn State, West Virginia, Pittsburgh, many other big places out there. Don't take them at all. It is a transcript and information you provide on your application game. That's it. One thing that students need to do if they didn't already do is make sure they have locked up those teacher letter of recommendation requests. Need to make sure they've asked folks. We recommend 2. If they've asked them and they haven't put those requests into SCORE, they need to do that. And we'll be going over that with them again next week. But that's something they need to do so that the teachers know that whose letters they need to write. What teachers are looking at is they are going by deadline date when they write. Yes, we know you asked them last year, but so did potentially 33 other students. They are going to work typically in order of the deadlines that you have in there. Their goal is to get everybody's stuff in on time. So someone's going to be first, someone's going to be last. I've been here, I don't know, 7 or 8 years at this point. And the only time I've seen deadlines be missed are when students didn't do their part in putting in requests on time or asking people on time. So if my deadline is November 1st and I don't ask a teacher until October 28th, that's not going to happen by that deadline. You need to give a lot more lead time on that, especially because with that big deadline day, teachers already have a plan for which other letters they need to be done by November 1st, and yours is going to be last. And the same thing really goes to the counselors, because if you haven't given the counselors these things that are here on the screen, the feedback forms, the parent point of view, the student brag sheet, they can't write your letter. If you don't get it done until Halloween, they've already got other ones. They're probably still trying to finish on the 1st. Yours may not get done. So you got to make sure you do your stuff and get it in on time, which is for us at least 2 weeks before your first deadline. Once we get past your first deadline, I'll be honest, things are pretty wonderful here in counseling land. Go on other days where I'm printing things out and putting them in envelopes and mailing them. I'm literally, kids sitting in the office with me, they said, oh, I just decided to apply here. The deadline's tomorrow. I say, click, and that's it. It's gone. It's the first one that they have to get out the door that requires all of these letters of rec, transcripts, et cetera. That's the big hurdle that we have to get over. In terms of the essay, students have heard about it. They worked on it in English class last year. I do encourage them to have someone read it over. I don't really encourage them to have lots of people read it over because it starts to become like some amalgamation of different people's thoughts, and it winds up not making sense and not sounding anything like the student intended it to sound. So I really encourage them to limit how many people they're asking, how much feedback they're asking for. If they're working with somebody that you're paying to help them with their essay and they've done a lot of brainstorming with that person, I really tell students, do not shop that essay around more. That person that you've been paying, who you hopefully trusted because that's why you're paying them, right? That you have built a relationship with them. They did a lot of work with you to brainstorm. And the reason that it looks the way it does is because that's what makes sense with what you said you wanted. And when you then start shopping that essay around to me, teachers, 6 different students from your class, it no longer looks like that thing that you tried so hard to focus a certain way. Especially with those students, I encourage you really hone in with that person that you've been working with, and really get your money's worth on what you've been paying for in terms of essay tutoring. I will help students review essays. I really have to limit it to like one main essay and a supplement per person. There's 590 seniors this year, which is a lot. I will start reviewing essays starting on September 23rd. Students can share them with me earlier, and I will start forming a line, a virtual line, if you will. And I do tell students that you have to allow about 2 weeks for me to get you feedback. It is one thing I'm doing, but not, I'm doing a lot of things. So a lot of times I'm kind of working on this in my off time as well. What else? These are the other things that are part of the application. I do encourage students on the activities and awards section to remember things like not full sentences, sentence fragments, but things that are grammatically correct. Utilize a lot of the resources that are out there that I send them, like the College Essay Guy, Help Guide to Activities. He's got some great examples there on how to word things in a way that sounds really good. It's not overinflating it and making it into something that isn't, but it makes kind of a mundane description sound a little bit better. And if no other time, if a student is going to kind of brag about themselves and the things that they've accomplished and the ways that they've contributed, their college application is the time in their life to do that. In terms of an actual resume, I would say back when I started in admissions, 20 years ago now, we received more resumes. That was really before the land of the Common App and long activity lists and things like that. At this point, I generally really only recommend a resume if it's accepted by the school. One, don't force it on somebody that doesn't want it. And if it's also not a repeat of the activities section. If you are just reforming that activities section into something that looks prettier, then it's not adding value. And what does that mean? The person that is sitting there and is reviewing, or maybe 2 people that are reviewing your application in tandem, since you're giving them more things, now they're spending less time on each thing. But if it's just repeating the same thing, there was no point in doing that. You would rather them spend more time on the one thing with all the info on it, which is the stuff that's on the application itself. There's a lot of different things that they'll report in that activity section, including things that they do both inside and outside of school, volunteer hours, honor societies, all of those types of things will be reported there. Sometimes students need a little extra space, especially our students who are involved in the arts. Sometimes they need to utilize the additional info section. Our students who've done research and things like that require more than 150, I think it's 150 characters. They might need a little bit more space. They'll utilize that additional info section. And we'll work on that throughout the fall as we kind of keep going into application season here. Outside letters of recommendation, students can ask them. It is not a must, except the University of Texas Austin, who this year has decided that they would really love to hear from someone outside of here. So if your kid's applying to UT Austin, they should find someone outside of school to ask. Otherwise, I would say it really depends on the student. That person needs to know them personally. So just because dad's old fraternity brother went to grad school at UPenn, that is not helping a student's UPenn application. Dad's old fraternity brother had that kid work there for a whole summer as an intern, and so he was also that kid's boss. That is more meaningful, but not in the fact that dad's old fraternity brother went to UPenn. It's meaningful because he worked with the kid. He can talk about what that student is like in another setting, and that's the piece that is valuable there. So it's not as much about the name of the person that's writing it, but how they know that student. We do ask that students, for the most part, do those outside letters directly through the Common App, because then the Common App takes care of sending them through. And I've got videos that show them how to do that. A little bit about financial aid. I'm not gonna lie, it is shaping up to be another not pleasant year, perhaps. I'm hopeful it's going to be a little bit better than last year in the land of financial aid. The FAFSA was greatly modified last year. It was kind of a mess. So if you have anybody that you're friends with that had a senior last year, I'm sure you've heard, or if you heard the news, it was pretty bad. This year, they're currently saying that it's going to open December 1st. I would call that December 1st-ish. It sounds like there is going to be some pilot group of people decided in who knows what way that is going to start doing that in October, and then they plan to release the whole thing in December. Hopefully it is in better shape than it was last year. That's the one application. That's the free application for federal student aid that everybody's going to use to determine federal aid eligibility. Some schools also use that to determine school aid eligibility. Then there's other schools, much smaller number of schools, skewing private, skewing more selective, that use something called the CSS profile. It is a College Board product, so it does require some payment. It is a separate financial aid application. I would say, I think it's likely that some other schools have added on to the CSS profile this year to try to protect themselves from the FAFSA situation of last year. So make sure that you're checking a current list, a current financial aid website to see what is required for each individual school on your child's list, because it may be different than what was required last year as schools try to insulate themselves from federal government delays. Some schools are also going to require that you upload things like W-2s, tax forms. So that is a good kind of parental guardian activity throughout the fall to start pulling together when you're getting really frustrated with your kid who's supposed to be working on other things. This is something you can do. Get your financial stuff in order. Do the CSS profile if you need to do that. Parents, I'm giving you authorization to do the research on the financial aid part stuff. Figure out what each school needs and what their deadlines are so that you can kind of work on that process, and it'll keep you from stressing about what they're doing or not doing on their side as well. And because deadlines are really critical. Schools, they don't really extend the deadlines. As an alert, the state of New Jersey has decided that beginning with this year's graduating class, students are required to either file the FAFSA or the New Jersey Alternative Financial Aid application, which is for certain non-citizens, or complete an opt-out form. In the coming weeks/months, we're going to put that opt-out form up in the forms section of Genesis for families that intend to do that. Otherwise, kind of the FAFSA and the New Jersey Alternative Aid application will become available a little bit later this year. So process-wise, how do we get, I talked about all these things, and now you're wondering how all these things get to the college and how do I take care of them all? First thing I really encourage students and families to do is to get organized. I would encourage parents, you start working on the financial aid organization piece, get your student to start working on organizing the information for the schools they're going to apply to. We need to know their deadlines. We need to know what they need. Do they need to do a self-reported academic record, or they need a transcript? Do they need to self-report their test scores or send official ones, et cetera? Put all that together in this spreadsheet, and it's linked in other places that I'll talk about later. I have a spreadsheet that students can use to make a copy of. You're welcome to use it, not use it, I don't care, but figure out a way to get it organized. Parents, this is really something good for you to help with, but not do for them. And the reason I say not do for them is because this smells an awful lot like doing job applications as an adult. And this is a good place for you to help build those life skills for those students so that they know how to kind of gather and synthesize information for other parts of their life and other decisions that they're going to make as they move into adulthood. So I said about resources, here they are, lots of them. I have a big application guide that's been out there for a long time. We have a handy dandy checklist. I've got a help guide, which I gotta say, I think it's pretty good. I encourage students to open up this help guide as they are working. It literally, on their Common App, in a separate tab, it literally tells them exactly what to put in for each thing. So if they're like, I really don't know what I'm supposed to put in this section, they just come here and it tells them exactly what it is. Wondering what the graduating class size is, it's here. Wondering what to put in the honors section, it's here. So keep that open as they're working. Same thing when they're working on a self-reported academic record. I've got this right here. It tells them exactly what to do for every single field. And it's because, yes, I do know that I have 590 students and I can't do every single thing with them. Got lots of short video tutorials, that Genesis transcripts available. Now, how do we get to all these links? For students, if they are in their SCORE account and they go right to their profile, there's something called My Drive, and they're going to find all of these kinds of links linked right there. So how to complete the parent point of view, the SRAR tips and hints, everything is right there. So we're going to always redirect them to go into there because everything is linked together. And we want them to use all of those resources. So they shouldn't need to wait to get an appointment with me whenever that's going to be, if these are some of the questions that they've got, because they have all of the answers to those questions right at their fingertips. They want to make sure that they're really following the directions that we set forth. This is not their time in their life to think outside of the box and go rogue, because that's when bad things happen. And when I talk about bad things, what I mean is that their application is not complete. It doesn't get considered at all. They make a mistake and submit an avoidable mistake, submit an application, the college tells them they won't change it. They need to follow directions. So who sends what? Stuff on the left is what the student submits. The stuff on the right is what the counseling office submits. So a lot of the things that back in the day would go in the envelope go in a virtual envelope that is sent from us here in the counseling office. The stuff that the student sends is also all being sent electronically. They're not doing anything on paper. Even if a student is auditioning, submitting portfolios, that is all digital these days. There is not a stitch of paper involved here. This kind of tells you what's going to happen. Last year, somebody told me a chart would really help. So now we've got a chart. We got a little flow chart going on. So what happens? First thing they need to do is get those schools on their applying list and score. If they don't have them there, they need to get them there. Why? Because it drives everything else. Remember I said that when Ms. Barkin is writing those letters of rec, she's going a deadline order. So how she knows those deadlines is by which schools you have in there and which deadlines you've selected. So she just asked me the other day, like, hey, Ms. Thompson, how come most of my kids don't have deadlines on here? And I said, well, that's because we didn't tell them to do it yet. So we want to now get you to do that. And I promised them all at the faculty meeting that in the next week and a half, most of their students are going to have colleges and deadlines there. So I hope our students won't let us down. That's super easy. They could do it any time. It doesn't take very long, 10 minutes to add all their schools. A lot of our kids are like, hey, but my list on Common App is updated. That's great, but the two systems don't talk to each other. I will never see what you have on your Common App. So it needs to be in both places and it needs to be current. The student's going to complete our requirements, and I'll talk a little bit more about them. They're not new. We've been telling them about them since last February. If a school requires official test scores, the student needs to order those well ahead of time because you're paying, and while it's digital, it still takes a couple of weeks to be sent to a school. So for instance, Rutgers, if a student's going to submit scores there, requires official test scores. They also require that they be there by November 1st. So that means that you need to send them out by the 12th or so to guarantee that they're going to get of October, to guarantee they're going to get there by November 1st. So there's some backing up of dates. And don't worry, no one will ever tell me that I don't communicate enough, because you're going to get more reminders than you could ever think you could want or need throughout the fall. So I'll warn students, I'll give them little things like, these are the things you should be doing now. You're applying to November 1st schools. This weekend, you need to request your official scores to go out. So I'm going to prompt students, parents, when I send out kind of regular communications to students, I copy parents and guardians on all of those things as well. I do a lot on social media as well. I have a pretty active Instagram throughout application season. Some nights I'll hop on and even do Q&As with students right there. I've done short little reel videos on demand, like, hey, let me just record it right now for you, and I'll zip it right up there and put it up there sometimes for students after hours if I know they're struggling, to try to keep them moving through. So encourage students to follow me on Instagram, especially where we do a lot of interaction to get a lot of reminders, a lot of things like that going through there. Student submits their app. Notice that student submitting their app part is way before the counselor sending their stuff. And it's because in most cases, they're going to submit that application before we send their things out. Once they submit that app, they're going to move it over to the applied column and score. So they move it from applying to applied. That's our signal as counselors. It's time to send stuff out. Now, hopefully, we've been moving right along. We've been preparing things kind of on the side. We've been building up those teacher letters that the teachers will submit to score. The counselor is working on their letter. We're getting a transcript ready to go, and then we're going to push that out. Students do need to allow about at least really 10 business days for that first application to make sure that we get everything out. So they need to make sure realistically that they have all the schools on their list, that we know by mid-October who's got those November 1st deadlines, so that we can queue up all the things that are in red to get those out the door by November 1st. You do see that the submitting the application is before. Will we deviate from that as we get close to deadlines? Yes, we will. As we get close to deadlines, we start sending your stuff out, even if you didn't submit yet. But the schools have to be on your list in SCORE for us to even know you're applying. You can't sneaky add things on November 1st at 11:30 and think that Mrs. Thompson is sitting there to send out your stuff, because I've got to tell you I'm not. So kids got to plan ahead. After the student submits, they do their self-reported grades like the SRAR, and then they just got to follow up and make sure that everything gets received by the school. That's the other piece of that puzzle that's kind of happening afterwards. So these are some things that they got to do set up for. Good news is all the stuff that is here in the top under everything on this page is a one and done thing. Once they've done it and they've checked it off, like, they're not doing it again. We're going to review all of this stuff with them next week. You're seeing the transcript release form in Genesis. Thank you for being the first class that has done a truly wonderful job in getting that completed. I think I have like 3 that were outstanding when I checked on the second day of school. So that's fantastic. I appreciate not chasing those down through the whole fall. So thanks to parents and guardians for getting on top of that. Another thing you all can do is that parent point of view survey. If you have not done it yet, it can be done in your student SCORE account or in your parent SCORE account. We don't care which one. However, if you do it in your student SCORE account, that's great, but know that your student can see what you wrote, which should be fine. If you do it in your parent account, they can't see what you wrote, and you also can't see through the student account that it's done. It doesn't make a difference to us. We can still see it from the counselor side. If you did it on your parent portal, on your parent page, and you submitted it through there, we've got it. But don't panic when you go to your student's account and it says like not done. Like, it's done. It's just done on the parent record and not the student record. It's okay. So student is moving merrily along. They're working on those applications. I've got some little hints and reminders up front. Use that personal email, please, all throughout. Make sure parents, please talk to them about appropriate personal email addresses, and make sure your child is using something appropriate and something that they check. And we'll check regularly, because that is how the school is going to communicate with them about things that are missing, all types of things. A good tip could be to create, a second personal Gmail that's got like a good, nice email address, and it's delivered to the same inbox as their other ones. So everything is, kind of going into one place, and it forces them to check it. That would be really important. If you know that your child is not a great email checker, I would say, I do not encourage you to check their email for them. That is not helping them to become a better email checker. It's encouraging them to rely on you to take care of it. That's not what you want, because it's not going to help them in life after here. However, I encourage you to have a time that you perhaps remind them that they need to do that. So one of my big suggestions is always like pick a day a week that, like, this will be the day that we kind of like regroup about college stuff. Like, hey, did you check your email? Hey, did you check your application status? How are you doing on things, etc. The good part about setting one time aside per week to talk about it, and then like kind of letting it go a little bit the rest of the time, is the house can become stressful during college application season, and it will do a lot to salvage a relationship. If you're helping to guide them, but they don't feel like you're nagging them. And believe me, I'm a parent, so like I'm definitely viewed of a high schooler, so I'm definitely viewed as a nag too. But that's something that's also really going to help them start to learn how to structure their time, and that's what you want them to do, because they're flying the coop. And this time next year, most of them are not going to be living in a house with you, and so they need to have the skills to structure their own time in a land where there is zero structured time in college. What are the big issues we see? Students that forget the Common App and SCORE don't talk to each other. That's probably the biggest issue out there, is that they, I'll get an angry email, usually like, hey, my child's application is complete. You didn't send their transcripts, and they'll tell me it's Sacred Heart. And I said, we had no idea they applied to Sacred Heart, because it's not on their SCORE at all. It's nowhere here. And that's why it didn't go out. And so that's more often than not the problem that we have. Problem number 2 is students checking out of the process completely, not checking emails, because you know what, again, 590 of them, 2,400 students in this building, that's how we communicate with them, is email. So they got to check that email regularly. They got to show up for those scheduled meetings. We've got those groups in the next 2 weeks. They need to come. That's where we're talking about all this stuff. And when they're lost, it's usually because they opted out of stuff early. I can do a lot more to help a kid who's been there along the way and kind of has some inkling. It's much harder when they've completely opted out until we get to like January 15th. And really just asking for help. Again, 2,400 students in this building. I have not perfected my mind reading yet. Hopefully that's coming, but it's not here yet. They got to ask for help. Come to help sessions. I will be doing, as the fall progresses and we get past some of these first humps of things, I do lunchtime help sessions. I do after school help sessions. They're just drop in. They come with other kids. They help each other. We hang out. They can snack, whatever. They work on their stuff for, 45 minutes or an hour, and then they leave and they feel like they accomplished a whole bunch of things and check them off their list. They work on SRARs there. They work on parts of the application. I'll throw things up on a projector if like everybody's confused about something, and we'll go through it. And that's a really good way to come. Maybe it's a lot less scary for some kids that are, not super comfortable being one-on-one. Like, come anonymously, bring your friends, come together. And a lot of times the kids help each other, which is super useful to me. And, they just got to reach out to us. Again, like, send us an email. At least that gets the ball rolling. We'll pull them in, but they got to reach out. All right. Set and test scores. I talked about how to do that. That goes through the College Board website. We talked about kind of the deadlines by which to do that. It's super important. That's a good thing to start getting kind of making track of, pretty soon, and figuring out what's got to happen, especially for those early schools. Then they submit. Some things to know. Once that application is out the door, it is like sticking it in a physical mailbox, only it's virtual, right? They can't change their essays after they're submitted. They can't change their activities. I've got some students who are really hot on submitting their apps, and for some places, like, I get it. It's a rolling admission school. It's Pitt. We're not sending anything. By all means, you want to apply to Pitt, go for it. Do the SRAR, submit stuff, get your decision early. Fantastic. There's big Southern schools that have like not enough housing. Get them in. That's fine. But there's a lot of other schools out there that if you submit it today, like, it doesn't matter. They're not reading their application anytime soon. So a student can submit their app to Rutgers today, go for it. That's fine. But know that Rutgers is not looking at it for another month and a half. They're not even looking at it. And if you apply today, if you apply on October 31st, whichever day you complete, doesn't make a difference. You're still not getting an admission decision until like between January 28th and January 31st. And every single person's getting it the same day, regardless of when they sent it. So I'm saying for those schools, don't knock yourself out. Don't rush too much, because I have had kids submit that Rutgers app with 0 activities on it because they didn't realize that they hit the actual submit button. And Rutgers said, like, too bad, sorry. They've had them upload the wrong essay. Too bad, sorry. They're not making those kinds of changes. So you want to make sure that they submit the best version of their application on time. And so that also means for the students that get really stressed in the second half of October, I will tell some of them, like, you're trying to do too much. You need to back off on this list. You're going to submit a lot of applications, but they're not going to be great, and you're not going to get the results you want. And we'll work together to dial back the expectations to something more manageable, to get the important ones out the door. There's some schools that I'm always going to tell those kids to apply early to. That's some of those big Southern schools. It's University of Florida, for sure. It is Clemson. It is Auburn. Who else am I thinking of? Penn State, November 1st, early action. If you're not applying then, don't apply. Purdue, University of Maryland, all of those schools, very key to get in an early action application. University of Pittsburgh, I really encourage students for Pitt to try to apply no later than mid-November. Don't get fooled by that rolling decision business, because it basically gets impossible to get in after that. And if they can apply before November 1st, that'd be great. The sooner they apply, the sooner they hear. The closer we get to November 1st, the longer it takes to hear from Pitt. And let me tell you how wonderful that first admission offer feels for a student. And let me tell you how wonderful it feels for them when they have that in November, when they've just totally stressed out that they submitted applications and now they're in waiting land and they're freaking out. And they're also trying to add like another 30 schools to their list. It's great when I can say, you already got in somewhere. What are you doing? Like, stop with the panicked, adding schools for the sake of adding schools because you think you're not going to get in. You already got in someplace. So stop doing that. And it really ratchets that panic level down. Student needs to submit when they're ready. They don't need to wait for us. If they are ready and they are sure, they can hit submit. Also, my PSA, the Common App crashes sometimes don't wait until the last nth hour because not good things happen. I can tell you, I've seen many teary videos from students who are having problems at 11 p.m. on November 1st when the Common App has crashed. So don't do that. Rutgers, I mentioned earlier, they take the Common App or the Rutgers app. Some important things to know, and I highlight Rutgers because more than half of our student body applies there. And also, I'm going to say it ain't your father's Rutgers. So Rutgers is a very different place than when I went to Rutgers in the late 90s. Students who would have been admitted, certainly would have been admitted then, and would have been admitted 15 years ago are definitely not getting admitted now. So it's important to know and have a realistic sense of who's getting into Rutgers. At Rutgers, most of our students are most interested in the New Brunswick campus. That's the one that's closest to here, New Brunswick and Piscataway. Students can apply to up to 3, as long as they haven't changed anything that they haven't notified us about yet. Students can apply to up to 3 schools within the Rutgers system. So they can all be in New Brunswick, they could be New Brunswick and Newark, et cetera. So they could apply to, if they want to be a political science major, they can apply to their first choice as School of Arts and Sciences in New Brunswick. They could apply to their second choice as Newark College of Arts and Sciences. They could apply their third choice to Newark. There's a School of Criminal Justice there, or they could apply to Camden. Sometimes I have students who I really want to do business, and they'll apply first choice to Rutgers Business School in New Brunswick. They'll apply second choice to Arts and Sciences because it is possible to do a school-to-school transfer at Rutgers once you're already there. So since a lot of them would rather be in New Brunswick, they'll do that as their second choice, and their third choice, they might be do Newark Business, for instance. Or a lot of them will just do all 3 New Brunswick schools. But I really encourage them to use all 3 if they would consider going to the school by starting in a different major. That, it doesn't do great things for nursing. I get it. You're not going to do it there. But for most other programs, do all 3. The preference offer matters. So that order matters a little bit in terms of admission, definitely for scholarship, and it definitely matters for honors programs as well. So student really needs to give real thought. Don't just pick 3 random schools because you're going to be not happy when you then get an honors and scholarship offer if you go to engineering, but you really wanted to go to business and you got into the business school, but the business school's like, well, tough. We weren't your first choice, so we're not giving you any money and you're not admitted to honors here, even though you would have qualified otherwise. So you got to put it in the right place. In terms of scores, I do generally say students should not submit scores below 1,300 to New Brunswick. And I'm going to kind of show you a little bit about that as we get to the next screen. So here's the Rutgers numbers for the class that just started at Rutgers this past week. The left column there, you can see the mid 50% of SATs. So they're somewhere in the 1,300s to somewhere in mostly in the 1,500s, and that's the mid 50%. So that means for School of Arts and Sciences, the top 25% of admitted students had SATs who submitted scores, had scores above 1510 for arts and sciences, so 1510 to 1600. The next 50% were between 1350 and 1510. Those of 1340 and below were the bottom 25% of accepted students when listed out by test score. So as you can see, you're kind of putting yourself in that bottom bucket already if you're sub 1350. At Rutgers, you do not get to decide by school what you want to do. It's either all test optional or all with scores. So they got to pick based on where they're applying. At the bottom there, I've given you a sense of our Hillsborough applicants to Rutgers last year and what their results were. If your kid went to school here last year, I'm sure they heard about it because there were lots of unhappy students. You're going to see lots of overlaps. Look at that school business right there, 142 apps, 45 admits. Admitted GPAs, those are weighted GPAs, were between 96 and 104, but waitlists were between 94 and 101. So, I mean, just having a 101 or 100 does not make you safe at School of Business New Brunswick. You might still be on the wait list. We had a 99 who was denied. So, there's a lot of other things about specific course grades, grade trends, course selection. For the business school, they care a lot about grades in math. They care a lot about math as SAT scores if you submit them, and they want to see you go far in math, basically. That matters a lot in engineering as well, almost a little bit less. Matters less in arts and sciences. So it depends upon the individual school that a student's applying to. And they do get, as long as they don't change anything, they get separate decisions for each of the schools within Rutgers they apply to. So they could be they could be denied to the business school, waitlisted to engineering, and admitted to arts and sciences. And that's why I tell them, do 3. You got to do them all. Make sure that you are taking it. I just see a couple questions on here that I just want to kind of clarify out loud, since people are asking about like the Common App. There's this PDF form with the recommendation, ignore it, delete it. We do not want it. We are not going to do it. When students are doing the Common Application, they should not put in email addresses, which is correct, for their teachers and their counselors, but they then are going to see this prompt for a PDF. Please don't give it to us. We don't want it ever. All right, I'm going to move on a little bit. So the big important thing that I hope you've gotten the gist of is that we're here to help them. We want them to own this process, but we're here to support them, to answer questions. Again, you've heard me say a bunch of times, like, I don't want you to do this for them. It really is not helping them long term. And your goal is for them to launch and stay launched, right? And to set them up to take this next step as adults. And so some of the ways to do that are start to scaffold those supports, give them supports, don't do it for them, encourage them to take those steps, because they're really important for them to take those kinds of steps as they move out of this place and into wherever their next place is. That's super important. I've got a lot of tips for you. We talked a lot about a lot of these things. Like I said, I email you guys, give them a heads up, like don't do it for them. Give them a heads up, like, hey, do you see that email from Ms. Thompson? Those are really good ways to do it in a way that is likely to be better received by your teenager. And I realize that things are not always well received. So sometimes it's a way of kind of figuring out how to do that doesn't come across as nagging, but does come across as being supportive. So I've got some different things for you there. All right, so we are going to kind of transition out of this place where we are.